The metal doors of the Zephyrian prison compound slammed shut with a sound that echoed through the massive hall. 23 human prisoners stumbled forward, pushed by alien guards whose forearms made them look like nightmares from another world. The creatures stood nearly 8 feet tall, covered in dark green armor that seemed to grow from their skin like the shell of some giant insect. Lieutenant Jake Morrison kept his back straight as he walked into the center of the room. His uniform was torn and dirty from 3 days of fighting before his capture, but his eyes remained alert. He counted the exits, noted the weapon positions, and memorized the faces of every alien guard he could see. Old habits died hard, even in a place like this. Next to him, Dr. Lisa Carter adjusted her broken glasses and tried to take in everything around them. As a scientist, she found the alien technology fascinating, despite their terrible situation. The walls seemed to pulse with a soft blue light, and the air tasted of metal and something else she could not identify. She had spent years studying the possibility of alien life, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. Around the edges of the Great Hall, hundreds of Zephyrian soldiers gathered to stare at the captured humans. They clicked and chittered to each other in their strange language, pointing at the prisoners with their long, clawed fingers. Some of them seemed amused, as if the humans were nothing more than interesting animals in a zoo. Commander Vextar stepped forward from the crowd of soldiers. He was larger than the others, with scars across his face that spoke of many battles. Golden markings on his armor showed his high rank in the Zephyrian military. When he spoke, a small device on his chest translated his words into English. "Look at them," Vextar announced to his troops, his voice filled with mockery. "These are the famous humans we have heard so much about, the species that thinks it can fight the entire galaxy." Laughter filled the hall. It was a strange sound, like the buzzing of giant insects mixed with the grinding of metal. The Zephyrian soldiers found the sight of their prisoners very entertaining. Vextar began to pace back and forth in front of the humans, his forearms, gesturing as he spoke. "We have studied your kind for many cycles. We know about your primitive weapons and your weak bodies. But most amusing of all, we know about your silly stories." He stopped and turned to face the prisoners directly. "You tell tales of warriors who cannot die, of heroes who fight gods and win, of mortals who cheat death itself and return from the land of the dead. Such foolish fantasies." More laughter came from the watching soldiers. Some of them pointed at individual humans and made comments in their own language that caused even more amusement. "There is one you call Achilles," Vextar continued, clearly enjoying himself. "A warrior who could not be hurt except in one tiny spot on his foot. How convenient for your stories that such a perfect fighter would have such a simple weakness." He moved to another spot and raised his voice so all could hear. "And what of Hercules? A man so strong he could kill a lion with his bare hands and hold up the entire sky. Did this mighty hero save your world from us? Where is he now?" The alien commander was warming to his subject now. His translator worked overtime as he spoke faster and with more excitement. "You have another story about a man named Jason who sailed across dangerous seas to steal golden wool from a dragon. A dragon, as if such creatures ever existed." Jake Morrison watched all of this without changing his expression. He had heard worse from human enemies over the years. But something caught his attention at the edge of the crowd. One Zephyrian soldier was not laughing with the others. General Thakmore stood in the shadows near the far wall, his arms crossed over his massive chest. Unlike the other soldiers, his armor was black instead of green, and it was covered with more scars than Jake had ever seen on a single being. This was clearly a warrior who had survived many battles. The general's large, insect-like eyes were fixed on the human prisoners, but not with amusement. He watched them the way a professional soldier studies an enemy, looking for strengths and weaknesses. When Jake met his gaze, neither looked away. Vextar was still talking, his voice growing, louder as he continued to mock human mythology. "You tell children stories about these impossible heroes to make them feel brave. But here you are, captured and helpless, and no mythical warrior comes to save you." He walked directly up to Jake Morrison and leaned down so their faces were only inches apart. Jake could smell something like burned metal on the alien's breath. "Tell me, human soldier," Vexitar said with obvious pleasure, "which of your fairy tale heroes will rescue you from our laboratories? Will the mighty Achilles break down our walls? Will Hercules lift our entire ship and throw it into space?" Jake remained silent, but Dr. Carter stepped forward. Several guards raised their weapons, but she ignored them and spoke in a clear, steady voice. "Commander, our stories are not just entertainment. They are instructions." The hall fell quiet. Even the chittering of the soldiers stopped as everyone turned to look at the small human woman who had dared to speak. Vextar straightened up and turned his attention to Lisa. "Instructions? Instructions for what, little scientist?" "Instructions for how to become more than human," she replied without hesitation. This brought a new wave of laughter from the soldiers, but Jake noticed that General Thackmore had moved closer, his head tilted as if listening more carefully. "More than human?" Vextar repeated as if he could not believe what he was hearing. "You are soft creatures with no natural weapons, no armor, and lifespans so short they are barely worth measuring. What could you possibly become that would matter to warriors? Like us?" Dr. Carter looked around the room at all the alien faces staring at her. She was frightened, but she was also angry. These creatures had destroyed human cities and killed millions of innocent people. They had captured her and her friends, and were planning to use them for experiments. But worst of all, they were mocking the very stories that had given humanity hope for thousands of years. "You think our myths are about impossible people doing impossible things," she said, her voice growing stronger. "But they are really about ordinary people choosing to do what needs to be done no matter the cost." "Enough of this nonsense," Vextar declared, waving one of his hands dismissively. "Take them to the holding cells. We will begin the experiments tomorrow." As the guards moved forward to surround the prisoners, Jake Morrison finally spoke. His voice was quiet, but it carried clearly through the hall. "You should listen to her, Commander. She is trying to help you understand something important." Vextar turned back to face him. "And what is that, human?" Jake looked past the commander to where General Thackmore was standing. The old warrior was still watching intently, and Jake got the feeling that he, at least, was beginning to understand that there was more to this conversation than simple human defiance. "Our myths are not about what we are," Jake said simply. "They are about what we choose to become when everything else fails." The guards pushed the prisoners toward the exit, but as they walked away, Jake heard General Thackmore speak for the first time. His voice was deeper than Vextar's, and when translated, it carried a weight of authority that made everyone in the room pay attention. "Commander," the general said quietly, "perhaps we should pay more attention to what the humans are trying to tell us." Vextar looked annoyed at being questioned in front of his troops. "They are defeated prisoners, General. Their words mean nothing." But as the humans were led away to their cells, General Thackmore remained standing in the shadows, thinking about stories and myths and the strange way the human soldier had looked at him. There had been no fear in those eyes and no surrender. Only a quiet certainty that seemed to suggest this war was far from over. In the days ahead, he would learn just how right the humans had been. The human prisoners had been in the Zephyrian compound for 5 days when the interrogations began. Each morning, guards would come to select different prisoners and take them to separate rooms throughout the facility. Some returned after a few hours looking tired but unharmed. Others came back with bruises and cuts, evidence that not all the aliens were as patient as their commanders might prefer. Jake Morrison sat in a small white room across from Subcommander Kalexin, a young Zephyrian officer who seemed eager to prove himself to his superiors. The alien's armor was newer than the others Jake had seen, with fewer scars and brighter colors that marked him as inexperienced in real combat. "Your military records show you have fought in many battles," Kalexin said, reading from a datapad, with his upper pair of hands while his lower hands remained clasped behind his back. 17 separate conflicts across your planet. You have killed many enemies." Jake said nothing. He had learned long ago that saying too much during interrogation usually made things worse for everyone involved. "Yet your body shows no special adaptations for combat," the young officer continued. "No natural armor like ours. No claws for fighting. No enhanced reflexes that our scans can detect. How does your species expect to be effective warriors when you are so poorly designed for battle? Kid, Jake finally replied, you are asking the wrong questions. Kalexin leaned forward, clearly interested. What questions should I be asking? You want to know how we fight without claws and armor? The real question is why we fight at all. Your people fight because you are built for it. We fight because we choose to. The alien officer made notes on his datapad, but Jake could see that. He did not really understand what he was hearing. To Kalexin, fighting was simply what strong creatures did to weak ones. The idea that someone might choose to fight against superior enemies made no sense to him. In another room across the compound, Dr. Lisa Carter found herself in a very different kind of conversation. General Thakmore sat across from her at a simple, metal table, his massive form making the furniture look like toys. Unlike the other interrogations, this one felt more like a discussion between colleagues. You study life, the general said without introduction. You understand how creatures adapt and survive. Explain to me how your species has survived so long when you are clearly not the strongest beings on your world. Lisa adjusted her broken glasses and considered her answer carefully. She had been thinking about this question herself since their capture. General, may I ask you something first? Thakmore nodded, a gesture he had learned from studying human behavior. How long have your people been the dominant species on your world? We have always been the strongest, he replied immediately. From the first day our ancestors developed intelligence, no other creature could challenge us. That might be your problem, Lisa said quietly. The general's large eyes focused on her more intently. Explain. On Earth, humans were never the strongest or the fastest or the most dangerous. We had to compete with creatures that could kill us easily. Bears, lions, wolves, snakes. Even the weather and diseases were constant threats. We survived by learning to work together and by refusing to give up when things looked hopeless. She paused, trying to find words that the translator would handle correctly. We learned that being weak could make us strong if we were smart about it. Thakmore was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Your myths, the stories about heroes, they are connected to this survival strategy. It was not a question, and Lisa nodded in response. The stories teach us that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they have to, not because they are naturally gifted, but because they refuse to accept that something cannot be done. Meanwhile, in the main command center of the compound, Commander Vexitar was becoming increasingly frustrated with the reports coming in from the front lines. The human resistance was not collapsing as quickly as his military advisors had predicted. Sector 12 reports that a single human squad has held their position for 3 days, reported Captain Ziktar, one of his senior officers. They are surrounded and outnumbered 10 to 1. But they refuse to surrender. Then kill them all, Vexitar replied, without looking up from his own reports. We have tried, sir. Every time we think we have eliminated them, more humans appear, from nowhere. Our field commanders report that the humans seem to know the terrain better than our own maps indicate. Vexitar finally looked up from his work. What do you mean they appear from nowhere? The squad should have run out of ammunition 2 days ago, but they are still fighting. They should have starved by now, but they keep launching attacks against our positions. Some of our soldiers report seeing the same human fighters die in one location and then appear alive in another location hours later. The commander slammed one of his fists on the desk. Impossible. Humans do not have resurrection technology. Our intelligence reports are very clear about their capabilities. Yes, sir, but our field reports are also clear. Something is happening out there that we do not understand. Back in the interrogation rooms, Jake Morrison was having his own conversation about impossible things. Kalexin had been asking about human military tactics for over an hour, becoming more confused with each answer. Your doctrine makes no sense, the young officer complained. You teach soldiers to fight to the death even when victory is impossible. This is wasteful. A logical military force would retreat to fight another day when the odds are against them. Sometimes, retreat is not an option, Jake replied. Sometimes you have to hold the line no matter what. But why? If you die, you cannot help your people anymore. Death serves no purpose. Jake looked at the young alien for a long moment, trying to decide how much to explain. Have you ever heard of a place called Thermopylae? Kalexin checked his datapad. A battle from your ancient history. A small force of warriors fought a much larger army and lost. All of them died. This proves my point about the waste of death. You missed the important part, Jake said with a slight smile. They held the enemy long enough for the rest of Greece to prepare for war. Those 300 Spartans saved their entire civilization by choosing to die at the right time and the right place. The alien officer stared at him as if he had said something completely insane. They chose to die? They chose to become something more important than their individual lives. They became a symbol that inspired millions of other people to fight, harder than they ever thought possible. In her own room, Dr. Carter was trying to explain a similar concept to General Thakmore. The stories are not just entertainment, General. They are instruction manuals for transformation. Transformation? Into what? Into whatever we need to become to survive. If we need to be stronger than humanly possible, we remember Hercules. If we need to be braver than seems reasonable, we remember Achilles. If we need to accomplish something that looks impossible, we remember Jason and his quest for the golden fleece. Thakmore leaned back in his chair, his claws clicking against the metal table. You are saying that your myths are psychological tools for exceeding normal limitations. Exactly. Every human child grows up learning dozens of these patterns. When we face a crisis, we do not just react with instinct like animals. We choose which story fits our situation, and then we try to live up to that story. Even if it means death? Especially if it means death. Because in our stories, heroes who die for the right reasons do not really die. They become legends, and legends inspire other people to become heroes themselves. The general was quiet for several minutes, clearly thinking through the implications of what he was hearing. Finally, he spoke again. Dr. Carter, I have been a warrior for most of my life. I have conquered 17 different star systems and defeated enemies that were stronger and more advanced than my own people. But I have never encountered anything like what you are describing. What do you mean? An entire species that has learned to consciously override its survival instincts in service of abstract concepts like honor and duty. Most creatures fight hardest when they are trying to stay alive. You are telling me that humans fight hardest when they have decided to die? Lisa nodded slowly. That is exactly what I am telling you, General. As the day's interrogations came to an end and the prisoners were returned to their cells, both Jake Morrison and Dr. Carter noticed that their questioners seemed troubled by what they had heard. The young sub-commander Kalexin kept shaking his head as if trying to clear it of confusing thoughts. General Thakmore walked more slowly than usual, clearly processing information that did not fit with anything he had learned in his long military career. That night, reports continued to arrive from the battlefronts, and each one brought news that made less sense than the last. Human forces were not behaving like any enemy the Zephyrians had ever fought. They were not following logical military doctrine or responding to defeats in predictable ways. Instead, they seemed to be getting stronger with each loss, more determined with each setback. It was as if the humans were fighting an entirely different kind of war, one where the normal rules of victory and defeat did not apply. General Thakmore spent most of the night reading these reports and thinking about his conversations with Dr. Carter. Somewhere in the back of his mind, a terrible suspicion was beginning to form. The emergency alarm in the Zephyrian command center had been sounding for 20 minutes, when Commander Vextar finally managed to get a clear communication link with his forces in Sector 7. What he heard made him question whether his equipment was functioning properly. Repeat your last transmission, Captain Mordek, Vextar ordered, gripping his communication device with two of his hands, while the other two worked frantically at his control panel. The voice that came back through the speaker was filled with confusion and something that sounded almost like fear. Sir, the human squad we surrounded 3 days ago is still fighting. Not only are they still fighting, but they have begun advancing against our positions. Impossible. How many humans are in this squad? Our initial count was 12 soldiers, sir, but that cannot be correct. Vextar felt his patience wearing thin. What do you mean it cannot be correct? There was a pause before Captain Mordek responded. Sir, We have confirmed kills on at least 18 different human soldiers in this engagement, but our current visual count shows 12 humans still active and advancing on our eastern flank. The commander stared at his communication device as if it had personally insulted him. Captain, are you telling me that you have killed more humans than were originally present, and yet the same number are still fighting? That is exactly what I am telling you, sir. And there is something else. What? The human leading the squad was killed yesterday at 14:32 hours. Direct hit from a plasma rifle at close range. We recovered the body and confirmed death. But at 14:35 hours, the same human was observed leading another charge against our forward positions. Commander Vexitar terminated the communication and sat in silence for several minutes. Around him, his staff officers exchanged worried glances, but none dared to speak. Finally, he activated his personal communicator and sent a message to General Thakmor, requesting an immediate meeting. The general arrived within minutes, still carrying the datapad he had been studying when the summons came. Commander, what is the situation? General, I need you to review the tactical recordings from Sector 7. Something is happening there that makes no sense according to any military doctrine I have ever studied. They moved to the main display screen, where Vexitar had prepared several hours of battlefield footage. The first recording showed a standard engagement between Zephyrian forces and a small group of human soldiers. The humans were clearly outnumbered and outgunned, trapped in a defensive position with no hope of escape or reinforcement. Standard scenario, Thakmor observed. The humans should surrender or be eliminated within hours. Keep watching, Vexitar replied grimly. The recordings continued, showing the battle as it developed over 3 days. At first, everything proceeded as expected. The Zephyrian forces slowly tightened their circle around the human position, picking off defenders one by one. But then something strange began to happen. The humans did not become more desperate as their situation grew worse. Instead, they seemed to become more determined. Every time a soldier fell, the others fought harder. When their ammunition should have run out, they continued firing. When their defensive position should have been overrun, they somehow held their ground. Pause the recording, General Thakmor ordered. Go back to timestamp 1432. The screen showed a clear view of a human soldier being hit by enemy fire. The man spun around and collapsed, clearly dead. His body remained motionless for several minutes while the battle continued around him. Now, advance to 1435, Thakmor said quietly. The same human soldier appeared on the screen, very much alive, rallying his men for another defensive push. He moved with the same mannerisms, carried the same weapon, and even had the same facial scar that had been visible in the earlier footage. This is impossible, Vexitar muttered. Humans do not have cloning technology. They do not have resurrection devices. They cannot simply return from death. General Thakmor studied the screen in silence, his mind racing through possibilities. Commander, have you identified the leader of this human squad? Yes. According to our intelligence files, he is Sergeant Danny Brooks. Age 34, standard human. Infantry training, nothing remarkable in his service record. He should be completely ordinary by human military standards. And yet he is leading a squad that appears to be immune to normal casualties. Thakmor turned away from the screen and began pacing the room. Commander, I need to speak with the human prisoners immediately. Which ones? All of them, but start with Dr. Carter and Lieutenant Morrison. An hour later, General Thakmor found himself in the holding area where the human prisoners were kept. He had dismissed all the guards except for 2, and he approached the humans with a manner that was more respectful than threatening. Dr. Carter, Lieutenant Morrison, I need to ask you about something that is happening on the battlefield. Jake Morrison looked up from where he had been sitting against the wall. What kind of something? Your people are not dying when they should be dying. Lisa Carter and Jake exchanged a quick glance. What do you mean, General? Lisa asked. I mean that we have footage of human soldiers being killed in combat and then returning to fight again hours later. The same individuals, not replacements. This should be impossible. Jake was quiet for a moment, then smiled slightly. Should be, yes. But you are starting to understand that humans do not always do what should be possible. Explain this to me, Thakmor demanded. How does a dead soldier return to life? General, Dr. Carter said carefully, are you familiar with the concept of psychological death versus biological death? No. In human psychology, there are different kinds of death. Physical death is when the body stops functioning. But there is also the death of fear, the death of doubt, the death of the part of yourself that believes something cannot be done. The general's translator worked to process this concept. You are saying that your soldiers are not actually dying? I am saying that the part of them that could be stopped by death has already died, Jake replied. When a human soldier decides that his mission is more important than his life, something changes. The person who was afraid of dying is gone. What remains is someone who cannot be stopped by normal means. That is not scientifically possible, Thakmor protested. General, Lisa said gently, your people evolved as natural predators. You fight because you are strong and built for combat. But humans evolved as prey animals. We developed intelligence and cooperation to survive against creatures that were much more dangerous than we were. She stood up and moved closer to the bars of their cell. Over thousands of years, we learned that the mind is more powerful than the body. We learned that believing something strongly enough can make it true, even when logic says it should be impossible. Your soldier in Sector 7, Jake added. Sergeant Brooks. He has probably decided that he is Achilles, the warrior who could not be killed in battle. Or maybe he thinks he is one of the 300 Spartans at Thermopylae, fighting to the death for something greater than himself. These are stories, Thakmor said, but his voice lacked conviction. Myths and legends. To you they are stories, Jake replied. To him they are instruction manuals. When a human decides to become a hero from our myths, the normal rules stop applying. Heroes do not stay dead when their people need them. The general was silent for a long time, processing what he was hearing. You are telling me that your soldiers can overcome death through willpower alone. Not overcome, Lisa corrected. Transcend. They become something beyond normal human limitations by choosing to embody the patterns our culture has developed over thousands of years. The stories are not just entertainment, Jake added. They are psychological tools that allow ordinary people to access extraordinary capabilities when the situation demands it. General Thakmor turned and walked to the other side of the room, his mind struggling to accept what he was learning. Everything in his military training told him that what the humans were describing was impossible. Dead soldiers did not return to fight. Willpower could not overcome physical limitations. Stories and myths had no power in real combat. But the evidence from Sector 7 was undeniable. Something was happening there that his forces could not explain or counter. Human soldiers were fighting with capabilities that exceeded their species' known limitations. General, Dr. Carter called softly, may I ask you something? He turned back to face her. What? How many other fronts are reporting similar problems? Thakmor felt a chill run through his body as he realized the implications of her question. 17 separate engagements in the last week have reported irregular human behavior. Irregular how? Continued resistance after tactical defeat. Soldiers fighting with severe wounds that should incapacitate them. Small units holding positions against overwhelming odds for far longer than should be possible. Jake Morrison nodded slowly. It is spreading, General. More and more human soldiers are remembering what they really are. Which is what? The children of heroes and legends. We have been telling these stories for thousands of years, passing them down from parent to child, because we knew that someday we would need to remember how to become more than human. General Thakmor did not sleep that night. Instead, he sat in his private quarters with the lights dimmed, surrounded by data pads and holographic displays showing battle reports from across the war front. For the first time in his long military career, he was studying an enemy not to find their weaknesses, but to understand how they had become so much stronger than they should be. The numbers told a story that made no sense according to everything he had learned about warfare. In every single engagement, Zephyrian forces achieved tactical superiority. They killed more humans than they lost. They captured more territory. They destroyed more equipment. By every measurement that military science used to determine victory, the Zephyrian Empire was winning this war decisively. Yet with each passing day, human resistance became fiercer rather than weaker. Each defeat seemed to teach them something new. Each loss made them fight harder instead of giving up. Each death appeared to inspire others to fight beyond what should be physically possible. Thakmor pulled up the detailed files on human military history that his intelligence officers had compiled before the invasion. He had reviewed these reports months ago as part of his preparation for conquering Earth, but at the time he had only been looking for tactical information about human weapons and strategies. Now he was looking for something different. He was trying to understand how an entire species had learned to use their own mythology as a weapon. The first battle he studied in detail was called Thermopylae. According to the records, 300 Spartan warriors had fought against a Persian army of over 100,000 soldiers. The Spartans knew they could not win. They knew they would all die. They chose to fight anyway. What interested Thakmor was not the battle itself, but what happened afterward. The 300 dead Spartans had somehow inspired the rest of Greece to fight harder than they ever had before. Their sacrifice had turned a certain defeat into an eventual victory for the entire Greek civilization. The general moved on to other battles. At a place called the Alamo, fewer than 200 defenders had held out against thousands of enemy soldiers. They all died, but their deaths had rallied an entire nation to fight for independence. At Rorke's Drift, a small group of British soldiers had fought off an army many times their size, and their success had become legendary throughout their empire. The pattern was always the same. Humans faced with impossible odds did not surrender or retreat. Instead, they chose to become part of their own legends. They fought not just to win, but to create stories that would inspire others to fight even harder. Thakmor realized that he had been thinking about this war in completely the wrong way. The Zephyrian military was trying to defeat human armed forces through conventional tactics. But the humans were not really fighting a conventional war. They were trying to become heroes in their own mythology, and heroes in human stories always found a way to win in the end. The general activated his personal communication system and sent a priority message to all his senior officers. Emergency staff meeting in 1 hour. Bring all current battle reports and casualty assessments. When his officers assembled in the main conference room, Thakmor could see the stress and confusion on their faces. These were experienced military commanders who had conquered star systems across the galaxy, but the human resistance was unlike anything they had encountered before. Commander Vextar spoke first. General, our casualty rates are climbing in every sector, not because the humans have better weapons or superior tactics, but because they refuse to behave logically. They continue fighting long after they should surrender or retreat. Sector 12 reports that a human medic ran directly into our crossfire to treat wounded soldiers, added Captain Zikatar. She was shot multiple times, but kept working until she had saved 3 other humans. She died treating the 4th patient, but her actions allowed the entire squad to escape. That is tactically stupid, Vextar observed. 1 medic trading her life for 3 soldiers is poor resource management. But General Thakmor was thinking about something Dr. Carter had said during their conversation. The humans were not just trying to stay alive. They were trying to become something more than human by living up to the patterns in their ancient stories. Captain, he said to Ziktar, what happened to the human soldiers who witnessed this medic's sacrifice? Sir? How did they fight afterward? Did they become demoralized by losing their medic? Ziktar checked his data pad. Actually, sir, they fought much harder. The entire unit seemed to become more aggressive and determined after her death. They broke through our lines 2 hours later and escaped to friendly territory. Thakmor nodded slowly. Because she had become a hero in their eyes. Her sacrifice had transformed ordinary soldiers into something more dangerous. The other officers looked confused, but Thakmor continued his analysis. Gentlemen, we have been fighting this war under a false assumption. We believed that inflicting casualties would weaken human resistance. But human psychology works in the opposite way. He activated the main display and showed footage from multiple battlefronts. Every time we kill a human soldier in a heroic manner, we create inspiration for a dozen other humans to fight harder. Every time we force them to choose between safety and honor, they choose honor and become more dangerous. Commander Vextar shifted uncomfortably in his seat. General, what are you suggesting? I am suggesting that we have invaded a species that has spent thousands of years training itself to turn defeat into victory through sheer force of will. Their entire culture is designed to create heroes who can exceed normal limitations when necessary. The room was quiet as the officers processed this information. Finally, Captain Mordek spoke up. Sir, if that is true, how do we defeat them? Thakmor was quiet for a long moment, thinking about his conversations with Jake Morrison and Dr. Carter. I am not certain that we can defeat them, Captain. Not in the way we have defeated other species. General, Vextar said with concern in his voice. Surely you are not suggesting that these primitive humans can match the military might of the Zephyrian Empire. Commander, I have fought in more battles than any officer in this room. I have seen courage and determination from many different species. But what the humans are showing us is not just courage. It is something beyond that. He stood and began pacing around the table, organizing his thoughts. Every other species we have conquered fights hardest when they are trying to stay alive. Fear of death motivates them to resist, but eventually that same fear causes them to surrender when the situation becomes hopeless. Humans are different. They fight hardest when they have decided to die for something important. Death does not frighten them into surrender. Instead, the possibility of heroic death inspires them to become more than they normally are. Captain Ziktar raised one of his hands. General, even if that is true, they are still just individual soldiers. They can only do so much damage before we overwhelm them with numbers. That is where you are wrong, Captain. What we are seeing is not just individual heroism. It is a cultural pattern that can spread from person to person. When one human becomes a hero, others are inspired to attempt the same transformation. Thakmor activated another display showing casualty reports from the last 2 weeks. Look at these numbers carefully. Human resistance is not decreasing as we inflict losses. It is increasing. More human soldiers are fighting with extraordinary determination now than when the war began. The officers studied the data in silence. The pattern was undeniable. Every major battle that resulted in human deaths had been followed by increased resistance in nearby sectors. It was as if human defeats were somehow making them stronger. General, Commander Vextar said slowly, what you are describing sounds like some kind of psychological contagion, as if heroism can spread from one individual to another. Exactly. And if I am correct about how human mythology works, we may be facing something much more dangerous than we initially realized. What do you mean? Thakmor turned to face his officers directly. What if this entire war is causing the human species to remember what they really are? What if every battle, every sacrifice, every heroic death is awakening something in their cultural memory that has been waiting for the right moment to emerge? He paused to let this sink in before continuing. We invaded Earth expecting to fight. Ordinary humans with limited technology and no special abilities. But what if we have accidentally triggered a process that is transforming them into the heroes from their own legends? The room was completely silent now. The implications of what the general was suggesting were staggering. If human mythology was more than just stories, if it was actually a system for unlocking hidden capabilities, then the Zephyrian Empire might have made a terrible miscalculation. General, Captain Mordek asked quietly, what do we do now? Thakmor looked at the battle reports one more time, thinking about Sergeant Danny Brooks and his impossible squad, about the medic who died saving her comrades, about all the humans who were choosing to become heroes instead of victims. Now, he said finally, we try to understand what we are really fighting before it is too late to find a solution. But even as he said the words, Thakmor suspected that it might already be too late. The morning alarm in the Zephyrian compound sounded different than usual. Instead of the normal wake-up signal, it was the emergency tone that meant something serious had happened. General Thakmor was already awake in his office, reviewing the overnight reports that had been arriving every hour with increasingly disturbing news. 17 different battlefronts were reporting the same phenomenon. Human forces that had been nearly defeated were suddenly fighting with abilities that seemed impossible. Soldiers who should have been dead were leading new attacks. Units that had lost all their equipment were somehow still armed and dangerous. Most troubling of all, the humans were no longer just defending their positions. They had begun to advance. Commander Vextar burst into the general's office without waiting for permission to enter. His usually controlled demeanor was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like panic. "General, we have lost contact with the entire 4th Battalion in Sector 15. He reported breathlessly. Their last transmission was at 400 hours. They reported being surrounded by humans who appeared to be immune to our weapons. "Immune how?" Thakamore asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Direct hits from plasma rifles that should have been fatal were not stopping them. Our soldiers reported that the humans seemed to heal from wounds within minutes. Some were seen fighting with injuries that should have killed them instantly. The general set down his datapad and looked directly at his subordinate. "Commander, I need to speak with the human prisoners immediately, all of them together in the main hall." "Sir, is that wise? If they are somehow coordinating the resistance efforts?" "They are not coordinating anything, Commander. They are simply being what they have always been. The question is whether we can understand it in time to prevent our own destruction." An hour later, all 23 human prisoners stood in the center of the main hall where they had first been brought for mockery weeks ago. But the mood in the room was very different now. The Zephyrian soldiers who had once laughed at human myths now watched their captives with nervous uncertainty. General Thakamore entered the hall alone, having dismissed all but a few guards. He walked directly to the center of the room and stood before Jake Morrison and Dr. Carter. "Lieutenant Morrison, Dr. Carter," he began formally. "I have come to apologize." The humans looked surprised, but Jake recovered quickly. "Apologize for what, General?" "For not listening when you tried to warn us about what we were really fighting." Thakmore's translator conveyed a tone of genuine regret. "For thinking that your myths were primitive superstitions instead of recognizing them for what they really are." "And what do you think they really are?" Dr. Carter asked gently. "Instructions. Templates for transformation. A cultural technology that allows ordinary beings to become extraordinary when circumstances demand it." Jake nodded slowly. "You are beginning to understand." Thakamore began to pace in front of the prisoners, organizing his thoughts. "I have spent the last 3 days studying every major human conflict in your recorded history. The pattern is always the same. When faced with impossible odds, individual humans choose to embody the archetypes from your ancient stories." He stopped and faced them directly. "But that is not the most frightening part. The most frightening part is that this transformation appears to be contagious. When one human becomes a hero, others are inspired to attempt the same change." "That is how it has always worked," Dr. Carter confirmed. "Our stories are not just entertainment. They are instruction manuals for how to transcend normal human limitations when survival depends on it. Your Sergeant Brooks in Sector 7, Thakamore continued. He was not born with supernatural abilities. He simply decided that he was Achilles, the warrior who could not be killed in battle. And in making that decision, he somehow became immune to weapons that should have destroyed him. Not immune, Jake corrected, transformed. When a human decides to become a hero from our mythology, normal physical rules become flexible. The general turned to address the watching Zephyrian soldiers. "Do you understand what this means? We are not fighting a conventional enemy. We are fighting an entire species that has learned to rewrite reality through sheer force of will and cultural memory." Commander Vexitar stepped forward from the crowd of soldiers. "General, surely you are not suggesting that human stories have actual power to change physical laws." "I am suggesting something far more dangerous than that, Commander." Thakmore's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "I am suggesting that humans have developed a form of psychological warfare that can transform ordinary individuals into beings capable of exceeding their species' normal limitations." He activated a portable display unit and showed footage from the latest battles. "Watch this recording from Sector 12. A human medic named Amy Foster runs into enemy fire to treat wounded soldiers. She is shot multiple times but continues working. According to our sensors, she should have died from blood loss within minutes. The footage showed a young woman moving from soldier to soldier, treating their wounds even as enemy fire continued around her. Multiple hits from Zephyrian weapons should have stopped her, but she kept working until she had saved 4 other humans. She died eventually, Thakmor continued, but not until she had completed her mission. And here is what happened next. The display showed the reaction of the other human soldiers who had witnessed her sacrifice. Instead of being demoralized, they seemed to become energized. Within an hour, they had broken through Zephyrian lines and escaped to safety. One human choosing to become a hero inspired an entire unit to fight beyond their normal capabilities, the general explained. This is not just individual courage. This is a species-wide system for accessing extraordinary abilities through psychological transformation. Dr. Carter stepped closer to the display. General, may I ask what you plan to do with this information? Thakmor was quiet for a long moment. Dr. Carter, in my long military career, I have conquered 17 star systems. I have defeated enemies who were stronger, faster, and better armed than my own people, but I have never encountered anything like what your species has shown us. Which is what? The ability to become more than what you were born to be through conscious choice. He turned to face all the human prisoners. Every other species fights hardest when they are trying to survive. You fight hardest when you have decided that something is more important than survival. Jake Morrison spoke up. And that bothers you? It terrifies me, Thakmor admitted, because I am beginning to understand that we have not invaded a planet of ordinary humans. We have awakened something that has been sleeping in your culture for thousands of years. The general walked over to where the young sub-commander Kalexin was standing with the other soldiers. Tell them what you told me this morning about the reports from Sector 9. Kalexin stepped forward nervously. General, the humans in that sector, they are no longer following normal tactical doctrine. They advance when they should retreat. They attack when they should defend. They seem to know things about our positions that should be impossible for them to know. As if they have become something more than ordinary soldiers, Thakmor added. Yes, sir. As if they have become the heroes from their own legends. The general turned back to the human prisoners. Dr. Carter, Lieutenant Morrison, I need to ask you a direct question, and I need you to answer honestly. What question? Lisa asked. Is this transformation reversible? If we withdrew our forces and ended this war, would your people return to being ordinary humans? Jake and Lisa exchanged a long look before Jake answered. General, you are asking the wrong question. What should I be asking? You should be asking whether humanity was ever really ordinary to begin with. Jake's voice was calm but carried an undertone of something that might have been warning. Our myths and legends are not fantasies we invented to entertain ourselves. They are memories of what we were capable of in the past, and instructions for how to access those capabilities. Again when we need them. Dr. Carter added, every human child grows up learning dozens of these patterns. Hercules for when we need impossible strength, Odysseus for when we need clever solutions to complex problems, Joan of Arc for when we need to inspire others to fight against overwhelming odds. You are saying that these transformations are not unusual for your species, Thakmor said slowly. You are saying that becoming heroes is simply what humans do when circumstances require it. Exactly, Jake confirmed. And General, you need to understand something else. What? This war has reminded every human on Earth that we are the children of heroes and legends. You have not just awakened a few individual soldiers. You have awakened an entire species to remember what it really is. The implications of this statement settled over the room like a heavy blanket. The Zephyrian soldiers who had once laughed at human myths now understood that they were facing something beyond conventional military resistance. General Thakmor stood in silence for several minutes, processing everything he had learned. Finally, he spoke again. What happens now? Jake Morrison looked at the alien general with something that might have been respect. Now, General, you decide what story you want to be part of. Are you the invader who underestimated the heroes and paid the price?